Hello and welcome to Read It with Whiskey. I am your host, Laura Juntunen, and in today's episode, we are talking with Seth Overton, the author of The Mortal Gate. And this is, I believe, the first full-length game-lit book I have ever read in my life. And it was so much fun to read. I'm so excited for us to dive into this interview. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Seth. Seth Overton is the author of The Mortal Gate, like I just said, his latest game-lit novel that explores the idea of escaping reality versus escaping from yourself. Born and raised in Missouri, he has found enjoyment losing himself in a good fantasy or science fiction book to feed his love and appreciation for imagination and creativity. Taking his love for books and writing, Seth became an English language arts teacher graduating from the University of Central Missouri to teach and inspire the next generation of writers. Seth currently lives in Texas with his wife teaching high school and also works to write enjoyable, relatable, and compelling stories for his readers. So as I mentioned, he wrote this book called The Mortal Gate, so let me tell you a little bit about what it's about. Connor Wright has always had an affinity for video games. Everything from discovery and adventure to stepping into different worlds outside his own, video games have given him an escape that he's always looked for. A new, immersive, augmented reality game called The Mortal Gate gives him this chance. By enlisting the help of his closest friends, he is given the opportunity of a lifetime to make his dream come true. But with new opportunities and the promise of compensation comes an unforeseen risk. The technology used to immerse the players has now trapped them inside with no clue how to escape. With no way to log out or remove themselves from the game, their objective is made clear. Endure the dangers of the game and face its mysterious antagonist in order to return to reality before the game destroys them. Talk about Jumanji and Zathura, like this, so many vibes happening right now. This book was really exciting. It was really fun. I loved that it really started out as a science fiction book and then turned into a little bit more of a fantasy story. And you will definitely hear us talk about that in the interview. So let's dive right in. Welcome to Read It with Whiskey, the interview podcast featuring science fiction and fantasy authors. My name is Laura Juntunen, your host and the author of the Shockwave series. I am also a book club moderator, speaker, and avid reader, truly invested in every author's story. Within this podcast, I bring to you, the reader, all the behind-the-scenes secrets to how these guest indie authors bring their books into the world. If you are a sci-fi fantasy reader, then you need to hear from these authors. Let's learn about the person behind the page. Sit back, sip some whiskey, and lean in to these self-published authors. Really quickly, I want to give you an episode update. All Laura J. Live update content will now be exclusively given to our Patreon members. This segment will no longer be featured in these public episodes on your favorite podcasting platform. However, you can gain access to this content by visiting www.patreon.com/readitwithwhiskey. Now, let's get on to the episode. Hello, Seth, and welcome to Read It with Whiskey. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Laura. Thank you so much for having me. This is fantastic.
I'm so excited to talk to you all about The Mortal Gate. This is your first book that you have published, and I'm so excited to talk about all the details and then maybe some future projects that might be coming up. But before we dive into all of that, I would love for you to tell our listeners, why did you decide to become a writer?
I've always written since I was a kid. English was always my favorite subject, and reading all the stories that they would assign us and then spending hours upon hours at the school and the public library, I kept on thinking, like, what if I came up with a story? What if I had actually just sat down and tried writing one out? And I would have all these fun ideas, like all the notebooks that I would have for all of my classes. I would just jot ideas down. Nothing ever really came to fruition, unfortunately, because I mean, it's high school, and those were those little pipe dreams that you would have. And then getting into college and spending a lot of time in my English classes, I thought about it again. And I was like, you know what? I actually want to sit down and try to put one together. And unfortunately, those ones didn't actually make the cut. I mean, I would get about maybe 2 or 3 chapters in and then all of a sudden not like it. And that was kind of a downer. But then the pandemic happened. I needed something that was going to be able to fill my time. And I just started sifting through all my old journals, all of my old notebooks. And I found some ideas. I'm like, you know what? I actually like this idea. I wonder what I can do with it. And I just started writing from there. I started putting it all on my computer, started playing around with characters and ideas. And then one day, just the ideas came and it stuck. It was very rewarding to think, you know what started off as a hobby is now actually becoming something real. And I just stuck with it. It was so fun. And I realized that I wanted to be a writer.
That is so exciting that you are another quarantine book writer, because that's where I started my first fiction series, the Shockwave series, which is a science fiction post-apocalyptic series. And that was born out at the beginning of quarantine too. So I love when I meet fellow quarantine book writers. We are our own little group in social media. So that's really exciting to hear. And you not only love to write, but you actually have work within English as well. Tell us what you do for your full-time job.
My full-time job, I'm a high school English teacher. I've been a high school English teacher for 5 years. And I love it because English has always been in my wheelhouse. I've always loved to write and I've always loved to read. And being in an age of tech and everything online, it's really hard to try and get students interested in picking up books. So I would always try to show my passion for it in the classroom. And it's always rewarding when a few of them say, you know what, you're right. I actually do need to feel the paper in my fingers and the ability to flip back and forth rather than just scrolling around all day. And it's so fun to be able to reach out to a younger generation and possibly even inspire future writers that are going to take the wheel whenever all of us other authors have found a stopping point. We know that It's going to be in good hands.
Yeah, that's so exciting. And yeah, I'm one of those people where I have to have paper to read my books. I do not like ebooks. Occasionally I'll do some audiobooks. Last year was like audiobook overload for me. But I was going to ask, have you had many of your students read this book? Because it just published in December 2021. Yeah. Have they been reading it?
I've had quite a few say that they were interested, and I actually did get it pushed to my current high school's library. And they are now able to go in and get it. I've had students come up to me, hey, where's your book at? I'm like, it's in the library. It's checked out. Is there only one copy? Unfortunately, yes, they only allow for one. You're just going to have to wait your turn. Or you can go to the local library where I also have given, I believe, 2 copies. And it's available here for the students that are interested in what I have, my coworkers, all my supporters that are here locally. It was so surreal to be able to just take my book and say, hey, would you mind having this? I would like to see if anyone would be interested in reading it. They were like, yeah, absolutely. Give us some copies and we'll put it in our system. I'm like, really? That's all it took?
Well, that was easy.
That's all it was?
Exactly.
And being the first thing that I've ever written, I was just so overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do because I had published it online and I thought that was the only way that people were going to be able to get it. Then all of a sudden, all these other windows started opening up. And it was fantastic.
It's interesting how many different places we can go as self-published or indie authors to put our book out there. But yes, at the very beginning, it's like overwhelming almost. And so when I first published, my first book was a nonfiction self-help book. When I first published that, I just put it on Amazon and I was like, okay, it's out in the world. And then I realized how terrible the concept of marketing is and how you got to talk about your book to get it out there. And that's one of the reasons why Read It with Whiskey was born, was to help fellow self-published authors get their book into the world. So this is another avenue where you can talk about your book and bring it around to new audiences. And which is why I brought you on the show, because I'm excited to help you out and hopefully bring your book to more people. So we've kind of been skirting the topic a little bit. The Mortal Gate. Seth, tell us, what is this book all about?
Well, The Mortal Gate, it follows the exploits of Connor Wright, a college student that really doesn't have a good outlook on reality. He doesn't really see the real world as really doing anything for him. And the only time that he feels comfortable and even remotely confident is when he's playing video games. He is a very avid gamer. He's going to college to become a game designer. And it just seems like his future is always going to be out of reach because regardless of how much he enjoys it, he still has to deal with reality. So that constantly pushes him back. Then he gets an opportunity that he wasn't really anticipating. A friend of his at a local game store came across a advertisement from their favorite game designer, Dominic Dawson, and decided, hey, they want me to test this. Would you be willing to help me with it? And at first he's a little reserved about it because he really doesn't like to be around other people very much. But with the promises that this game development has, it was hard for him to say no after that. So he and his friend recruit 3 others, and they dive into this fully immersive, cutting edge, augmented reality, which is just called the Mortal Gate, where they are put in a fantasy world of Albastair and they have to go on adventures. What they realize too late is that when they enter this world, they can't get out. The same equipment that they use to enter it is not letting them leave. After a couple of encounters with some baddies and some NPCs that seem a little too real, they realize the only way that they can actually get out is to play. This is in Connor's wheelhouse, but he has never played to this kind of extremity before, not one that actually could see their lives in danger. And the adventure takes them from there.
Oh, it's such a fun concept because I mean, we've all heard of Jumanji and Zathura. I loved that movie when it first came out.
Zathura was fantastic.
It was great, right? And those movies, they're similar. I mean, the original Jumanji, they're still in their own world, but the newer Jumanjis, they do get pulled into the video game. So obviously those concepts very similar, but I really liked just how the characters were pushed beyond their comfort level within the Mortal Gate, and specifically with who they are, who their avatars are. So let's dive into that a little bit. We have our 5 main characters, Connor, Riley, Mark, Danny, and Chrissy, and they each get turned into a character or gaming avatar that are traditionally in the RPG games. So let's go over each of those characters and explain what they look like for the most part.
Yeah. So main character, Connor, outright, these are not the characters that they had actually anticipated on becoming, which I think that kind of twist is what really pulls people in whenever they can anticipate, oh, this character is definitely going to go for this kind of identity, but then they get given something completely out of their comfort zone. So for Connor, as a reserved guy, he gets turned into an orc. Now, this is a traditional green skin, bulky orc that is just supposed to be this brick house badass. But for him and his personality, he can't comprehend it. It's not something he's used to, not used to feeling strong, not used to feeling like he can actually fight. Then his friend, his best friend in this, Riley, I don't want to give too much away about Riley because I feel that his character and his avatar, it really pulls in his whole life story, but he becomes a centaur and he actually enjoys it. Being the character that he is, he enjoys this new skin that he has, and the readers will definitely understand why once they get into his backstory. Mark, who is actually known by Connor and Riley as another gamer that recently got out of it due to circumstances, he gets turned into what is called a Triton, which is essentially a blue-skinned fish person. And he is considered to be this very naturalistic kind of character in the game, when in reality, he is not that kind of a person. He's very loud, he's very social, but this character has kind of just made him suppress all of that. He's not the kind of person that he is anymore. Then his girlfriend, Danica or Danny, she's a bit of a spitfire. In reality, she is very confident. She is very spunky, and she has that air about her that makes you think, you know what, this is the kind of person I would want in my friend circle. She gets turned to what is known as a tabaxi, which is a cat person. Automatically doesn't like it. She does not like what is happening, and it ends up being her driving force throughout the entire story. And then finally, Chrissy. Chrissy is a wild card. She just recently came into this group that either knows each other well or knows each other at least a little bit. She's a complete outsider. Very little is known about Chrissy at the very beginning of the story, and she becomes a tiefling, a fiendish character with red skin and horns and a tail. And at first, you don't know how she's taking the position of this character. And as the story progresses, it seems like that this is the kind of avatar that she was meant to be, but never realized.
Oh, that was great. I'm like going back through when I first read the book. I actually went into Google and I was like, okay, what are these people exactly looking like? Because I'm not too much of a gamer. I've had another one or two people who've had RPG type books. And so I did the same for theirs. I'm like, I want to know exactly what this author was thinking when they were developing these characters. So I went in there and I was Googling, what does an orc look like in RPG games and the Triton and all of these. And I'm like, this is just so cool. I was getting a kick out of it. I love this kind of stuff. And I got to say, I love that, like I said earlier, I like that the characters were challenged by the type of avatars they were given within the game, because they did not choose these. The game chose them for them to have. And well, obviously you chose as the author. Yeah. And I think I love going through the characters and asking who the author likes the most. And I think my favorite character was Danny. I liked her struggle throughout the story, but I also really liked the idea of being a cat person. Not really. I'm not a cat person myself. Like, I'm more of a dog person. I have 2 bunnies, but I like the idea of having cat abilities. And so I really liked that. And then along with her character as well. So who's your favorite character out of all of your characters you wrote?
And before that, I love the fact that you said that Danica was your favorite, just for those aspects, because it's funny. One of my beta readers and my editor also, they were both like, you know what? At first, I didn't like this character. I did not like it, and then they finished it. They're like, okay, I changed my mind. This is probably one of the most dynamic characters you've got besides your main. And I was like, okay, that's kind of what I was going for. Thanks for the feedback. It's really hard as the author, especially to not say that your main character is your favorite character, especially since the Moral Gate is written in Connor's perspective. But if I had to say that it wasn't Connor, because he was kind of developed like me. Whenever I was in college, I was huge into video games. It was kind of my escape while also struggling with being able to keep up with work and keep up with school, just to try and graduate and figure out what I wanted to do. And Connor is the exact same way. Mm-hmm. If I had to say that it wasn't Connor, I would probably say Riley. Mm-hmm. Riley has that dynamic about him that makes you think, you know what, I wish I had this kind of a friend in real life, somebody that is just charismatic and looks at the bright side of things, especially when things do not seem like that they are going so well. The moment that the story ends, you fall for him. You understand where he comes from and what eventually happens.
Exactly. Yes. Oh, I know it's hard deciding who your favorites are, especially as the author. Yeah. And that was actually going to be one of my other questions is Connor based off of any of your own personal traits? Because a lot of authors, they'll purposely do it, and then other authors will accidentally do it. I know I accidentally put some of my personality traits into my main character. It was not on purpose at all, but it turned out great. So how about you? Was it on purpose?
Kind of both. I needed a model. I needed a model of somebody that I knew was an avid gamer, and think, all right, well, what if this person ended up becoming part of the game that they were playing? What if they actually became the character that they were put in the game as? And for me, the same reactions that Connor has, those would be my exact reactions, because the difference between reality and augmented reality that is completely out of your own control, it's scary. And I had to think, like, how would I react to this? So that part I did put in, but also I didn't anticipate on him being so much like me from the moment that the story started to the moment it ended. But it was a nice little twist, because it really helps, especially in that first person perspective, to know, okay, I know that I've started off with this kind of a character. Where would I want to see them go? And for me, I wanted to see what Connor was going to be able to make himself feel by the end of it. And it's a little bit of both. I didn't anticipate on him fully being like me, but that's how it ended up. And the way that he interacts with the environment and interacts with his party members and even the NPCs and the villains, I keep thinking, you know what, I would react the same way.
Definitely.
And I think that my readers will also see some of that, maybe not in Connor, but at least in some of the other characters.
And speaking of NPCs, non-playable characters, so that was a big component in the beginning of the book where these people get put into a video game. And we have virtual reality now in our own world, but it's not to this extent. We're not stepping into the world, right?
Right.
But when this happens, that's one of the things that helped them realize, like, this is a little bit more than just being in the video game. So if you want to speak a little bit more on that, like what type of senses they experience that tells them, yeah, this is a bigger issue than we even imagined.
Absolutely. So normally when I think of NPCs being put in a video game, they're very, very generic. They're very basic, and they only are given a few lines of interaction. And what I wanted my characters to experience was a living, breathing world that reacted to everything that they did. One of my favorite kind of gaming concepts is one in which characters have consequences. So their very interactions and their very decisions that they make do affect the world that's around them, how they interact with humans, since they themselves are non-human characters. And the NPCs, they react based on the world that was created. If they are non-humans, they're definitely going to have different reactions to the main characters than what the human NPCs would. And I think that dynamic there, how realistic that I made them, is a little scary, because it's as if I am dealing with artificial intelligence that has had a mind of its own and is now reacting to these outside elements that is throwing their entire world into chaos. And they actually have to react to that.
Exactly. And they develop not necessarily friendships, but I mean, kind of, yeah, they get connected to these people within the story, which is really exciting. So we're not going to talk too much more about characters or NPCs and all that kind of stuff, because I don't want to give anything away. But I would like to talk a little bit more on the world building side of this story, because you not only had to create the world where Connor and his friends came from, but then you had to develop an entire gaming world. So how did that come about? Were there any specific games that inspired you in the world building, anything like that?
Yeah, the world building aspect of this kind of a genre is stressful, because you don't want to steal from existing worlds. You don't want to steal from things that other people have spent all this time and energy into creating. And then all of a sudden you say, oh, that's a good one, I'm going to take this. So I had to meld a bunch of different scenarios. I did pull a little bit of inspiration from games that I've played, such as Dungeons and Dragons, the Elder Scrolls series, the Dragon Age series, to try and get a sense of how the different environments and the different social systems work. But as far as creating the land and the world itself, that was more difficult. I wanted to be raw. I wanted to try and be as original as possible. And that in itself was what kind of pushed back the initial time I wanted to have this published, because I kept on developing more. I kept on adding things in. I kept on adding environmental hazards. I kept adding in different societal classes. And I'm a very descriptive writer, and that much description being put into the plains, the Rocky Mountains, the dry desert heat, all of that, I had to be as fresh and original as possible. That in itself, coupled with the experiences I've had gaming myself, that's what put the world of Albastair together. And I'm very proud of how it turned out, even though sometimes I look at my pages and go, I could have done something different with this one, or I could have put them in a different scenario, but it still worked out. And I couldn't be more proud of the world that I've created.
You definitely should be proud. It's really exciting. And like I said, I don't do much gaming, but I could see how this game could be a game in real life, because it is so descriptive and entertaining. So bravo to you. I loved it.
Thank you.
All right. So we also need to chat a little bit about the magic system within well, not necessarily. I mean, it's magic system, but it's video games. So you have powers and stuff like that in video games.
Yeah.
But in regular like fantasy books, some of this stuff would be considered more of like fantasy magical. So explain a little bit more on that side of things.
So this is where I had to pull from, again, my gaming experience on
Mm-hmm.
creating these characters that have different abilities, because as much as they have different races, they're also being given these classes where they have specific weapons, abilities, and weaknesses that really mold them into the characters that they become by the end of the story. So the magic system itself is experience based. The more that they interact with the environment, the different kind of fights that they have, regardless of how easy or how difficult they are, it helps to develop their character and develop their abilities. So once they have gained enough experience, they get new levels, they get new abilities. And not only that, they also get new additions to their appearance to make them more powerful, not just inside, but also powerful on the outside. And in fact, that's one of the fun things I had with creating my characters is like, okay, so I gave them these different skins. What about what they can do? They all can't be able to do the exact same thing. They've all got their weaknesses. A magic-based character doesn't do so well in hand-to-hand combat. Someone that specializes in martial weapons, such as axes and swords, they may be more susceptible to magic. And that's what I had to That's what I had to factor in. Each of the classes does pull from different games that I've played, only with my own little twists and turns to make sure that they are developing the characters and as original as possible. The magic itself is purely arcana, I guess would be the word to say, because they don't have a specific pool to gain all their magic from. It's either from their patrons or from their schools of knowledge, or even based on their bloodlines.
Mm-hmm. So
Each one is different.
Yeah. And I loved the scenes when they would have their power-ups, like in traditional video gaming, like, okay, time to power up. Let's go. We're getting ready for a big fight or getting ready for something exciting to happen. And I love those scenes because it was like, oh, I only got a +1 and this person got a +3. And it's almost like there's a little bit of jealousy or rivalry. Like, I want to be better, but then they're working as a team. So they have to like be happy for everyone. I love it. All right. So we talked a bunch about your book. I think if we talked more about the book specifically, we would travel into the danger zone of spoilers. So let's move forward with your Party Up Publishing. So tell us, what is Party Up Publishing and how are you involved, and how is the Mortal Gate involved as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So Party Up Publishing is a co-op. It's an author co-op that is developing into its own publishing company. It started off with just 3 individuals, Devin, Forrest, and Wanda. They all came together and said, this new world of writing that we're building, which is game lit RPG, and basic gaming based books. There's not a whole lot in the world of publishers that are either accepting those kind of submissions or really know how it works. So they developed one themselves. Party Up Publishing started to become a co-op for authors that were trying to get into the genre. I pitched them my idea for The Mortal Gate, and I sent them some sample chapters, and they said, this is exactly what we're looking for. Would you be willing to work with us? We'll help you to get the book finished. We'll help you to find people that are willing to read it for beta reading and even edit out using our own resources. And that's exactly what they did. They helped me to meet new people that were going to read my original drafts and tell me what is working and what's not. They helped me to find a good source of material to base some of my interactions on. They took me on, they put their trust in me, and they have not disappointed me. I have not disappointed them. It is always you put in as much as you take, that kind of a co-op.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. I've had a few different authors on here where they have similar situations where it's like concept of trading, like I'll beta read for you if you edit for me kind of thing, or just in the regular world with, like cover design. Maybe one person can do cover designing and another person is editing and they swap services. And so very similar concept, but they're building it into something more specifically for the game lit genre, which is a completely different genre.
Yeah.
As you've mentioned, it's very different. So that's really exciting. Are you planning on working with them in the future, hopefully, or are you kind of going into a different route? What's next for Seth?
Actually, they are helping me to develop my next series that I'm going to try to go for, because now that I have tasted the world of publishing and writing and becoming a published author, I want more. I want to be able to do more. And if my readers want more, I want to give them that, whether it is more for what happens with the characters in the Mortal Gate, or if they want to see something fresh, I want to do that. And my co-authors and co-ops over at Party Up Publishing, they want me to stick around. They want me to develop more, because it is helping not only me to gain traction in readers, but it's also helping to develop on the game lit world. That way we can inspire others to either join on or to use our services.
Very cool. Awesome. And speaking of, so the Mortal Gate, it's read as a standalone, but is there going to be sequels? Are there going to be spin-offs, or are we just going to keep it as one for now?
I've been playing around with this idea since the moment I finished, since the moment I wrote my last few lines. I just stood there and I said, what now? What now? And my beta readers, a couple of them have even said, you know what, I think you should try writing more onto this, because without giving too much away, it just seems like that there are some open questions that need to be answered. And I've played around with it. I've tried thinking of ways to move the Mortal Gate into something that's more open, and even possibly bring in new players to see how they would react versus how Connor and his friends did. But for right now, it's kind of sitting on its own for right now, until I can at least think, okay, this idea would work. And maybe there will be a sequel. Maybe we will see where Connor goes after this, because my readers will know his journey doesn't seem like that it's quite done yet. Exactly. And if that's what they want, that's what they're going to get.
And I like that you ended it how you did, though. We're not going to talk about what happens, but I like that it's a standalone. I'm content with where it's at. However, I wouldn't be upset if you decided to continue. Right. And then I always like the idea. I feel like this has definitely come out within the last few years, like specifically with Disney, but the evil character origin story, I think that could be entertaining. So I'll just leave it right there and let you think about that. All right. So
that's definitely something to think about. Thank you for that.
Yeah. All right. So tell us, do you have any upcoming projects that you're currently working on in other genres or anything like that?
Actually, yes, I am. I am currently working towards my very first trilogy that I am titling the Cloud Runner series. The Cloud Runner series is going to be a steampunk science fiction series that follows not as big of a group of adventurers, but a couple of very misfit characters that are trying to survive in a world that seems like it's breaking. I'm currently in my 5th chapter of the first book, and I'm just trying to see where it goes from there. Balancing that and also my work life, it becomes difficult, but I'm not giving up on it. I'm not going to let this one sit.
Very exciting. Oh, I'm excited to see what happens with that, because I haven't read too much of that genre, but I think it is very entertaining, the concept of it behind it. So I'll be watching. All right. So this wouldn't be Read It with Whiskey without talking a little bit about whiskey. So Seth, what is your favorite whiskey to drink?
My favorite whiskey to drink is one that I'm currently working on. It is called Angel's Envy. Angel's Envy is a Kentucky straight that has been finished in port wine barrels. It is delicious. And it also mixes very well with my favorite cocktail, which is a old fashioned. The whiskey itself, it has a very smooth scent at first. Like the moment that you pop open the cork, it is just this very ginger and sweet smelling whiskey that you can definitely tell that it's been put into wine barrels. And then the moment that you take in that first sip, it is a little sharp and it leaves a nice tingle just before it goes down, and then it just smooths out the rest of the way, and it is a very great sipping whiskey.
Oh, I love it. That sounds like the perfect finish to a whiskey. Great description. I love it. 10 points.
And whiskey is my drink of choice. I I like other drinks such as rum, and I like Scotch whiskeys, but just Kentucky straight bourbons are my favorite kind. And since moving to Texas, my entire world has been opened up to the world of whiskey because they have so many distilleries here, and I've been able to expand on my interest of it. And I got to say, I have found my favorite, and that is Angel's Envy.
I love it. Oh, I'm going to have to go get myself a bottle now. I don't think I've actually tried that one. So I love when I get recommendations.
Let me know if you like it.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Seth, tell our listeners, where can they find you? Where can they find your books and follow along with your journey?
Absolutely. So I do have a author's website. It is www.overtonbooks.com. And it is Overton Books because this is not going to be my only one. My readers have plenty to look forward to. You can also find me on Facebook, same name, Overton Books on facebook.com. And I can also be found on partyuppublishing.com, where you'll get to see my writer's journey on there as much as you'll find it on Facebook. And with those that follow my Facebook, I will start giving teasers and everything else that you need to know about my Cloud Runner series and possibilities of a follow-up to The Mortal Gate.
Awesome. Well, Seth, this has been so much fun. I had so much fun talking with you, and I can't wait to see what happens when next book comes out, all that kind of stuff. I'll be following along. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's been awesome.
So I mentioned in the very beginning introduction of this episode that the book kind of went from sci-fi to fantasy. And I think that's why I was so invested in the story from the very beginning. In the beginning, it's just like a regular story in our own world. People are living their lives in college and they like to play video games. Cool. But then it kind of goes into this sci-fi world where they get pulled into the video game. And then within that video game, it turns into a fantasy story because of the world that they are immersed in. Talk about a mashup of my favorite genres. It was so much fun. So anyway, you can tell that I'm in love with this story, and I would love for you to go and get it. It was a really fun read by Seth, and I'm hoping that he is going to create some exciting things that tie in with this story in the future, but I can't make any promises for him. We shall see what comes. Next time on Read It With Whiskey, we have a very big up-and-coming author coming onto the show. His name is J.P. McDonald, and he is the author of The Invisible Tether. And if you don't follow him on Instagram, you definitely should right now. He is a hoot. I love watching his reels. He's always coming up with some new content to share. And you can definitely check him out before we have his interview next time here on the show. But until then, go ahead, read some books, and sip some whiskey. I'll talk to you next time. You've been listening to an episode of Read It With Whiskey. I am your host, Laura Juntunen, and I just wanted to personally hop in and say thank you so much for listening. Your support of the podcast means so much to me, and I would really appreciate it if you could go onto your favorite podcast platform and rate and review the show. By rating the show, you're going to help more people find the podcast so then we can grow. Once you review the show, share it on your social media, share your favorite episode with your friends, and come back next time to hear more from self-published authors. I'll talk to you soon.